boy was John Paul Riddle. The place was Pikesville, Kentucky, and from that moment on, he was sure that he wanted to fly. But times would be tough for a boy to learn to fly in that era. College was almost out of the question, but fortunately, an appointment to the Naval Academy came, and Paul Riddle found himself a midshipman at Annapolis. Along with that appointment came the promise that he would get to fly. But from your aviation history, you know that naval leaders back in the early part of the 20th century did not feel that aviation had a future. In their minds, the battleship could never be sunk, and certainly not sunk by an aircraft. Of course, that was later proven wrong. But at the time Paul was in the academy, an airplane landed on the Severn River, and he and a friend got a boat, rowed out to it to give the pilots a ride back to shore. He was immediately confronted, and as he put it, giving the worst chewing out he had ever received in his life for having befriended those aviators, those barnstormers, those Sunday afternoon circus people. Well, he went back to his room and he thought about that, and he really wanted to fly. He decided that he would just resign from the Naval Academy because he no longer had an interest in the world of the Navy. One does not resign from the Naval Academy, and one does not just stand up and say, I've had enough of the Army, the Air Force, of the Navy, and I'd like to go home now, thank you. So his letter didn't have any apparent results until about 3 or 4 weeks later, when a couple of Marines showed up at his room. They escorted him very formally over to a large, impressive building, and unfortunately for him, he got to meet the Commandant of the Naval Academy. He spent the rest of the day with him, the Commandant asking him what had precipitated what he considered to be a rather ridiculous act to resign, and Paul made his explanations relative to flying and what the Navy had apparently promised him. Surprisingly enough, not so surprisingly now that I know Paul Riddle, but seemingly surprisingly, he convinced the Commandant to favorably endorse his request for resignation and forward it to the Navy Department in Washington. So J. Paul Riddle became the first person, and maybe the only one that I've ever heard of, to have resigned from the Naval Academy. So he left the Naval Academy and headed for the big city. Which one, I'm not too sure, but I do know that all he had was his Navy uniform. So he was a curious sight, walking the streets trying to find a way into aviation. He found an Army recruiter who said that there was a future for him in the Army. The Army was teaching people to fly, and they would certainly more than embrace him as a candidate. However, there were no openings in the classes, and it would be 6 to 8 months before he could get into a flight class. He didn't like that wait. He wanted to get on with aviation, so he persisted with the Army recruiter, and the recruiter said, well, there is a mechanic school that comes available now if you want to become a mechanic. Well, Paul wanted to get into aviation in any way whatsoever, and he did go to that mechanic school, and he did get his first part of aviation as a mechanic, and it had a deep impact on his life. He later then went on to eventually get his flying skills. The rest of that story is history, and although that's the way people refer to things at that point, in this sense, it is truly history. The history that Paul has been involved in as aviation grew, he grew with it. Through the Roaring '20s, it survived the Depression, fought the big war, prospered, progressed, and finally pushed into the space age. Names like Lear, Fairchild, Beech, and Cessna, those weren't corporations. Those were people. Those were good friends. Those were fellow aviators. To the world, Charles Lindbergh was a hero. To John Paul Riddle, he was Slim. Slim, a fellow aviator and a good friend. Howard Hughes, a business partner. Don Budge, a tennis partner, and surprisingly enough, a director of athletics at Embry-Riddle in an earlier time. You really can't discuss John Paul Riddle without talking a little bit about tennis. Here's a man who has taught the world to fly, a man whose school was so busy that at one time there were 200 new students admitted every Monday, and 200 graduates left the school every Saturday. Literally tens of thousands of aviators, thanks to John Paul Riddle and his staff, and that was his major accomplishment. But what was the first thing that he built at any one of these sites would be a tennis court. And what is he on my back to build here? But some tennis courts. There's method behind the tennis idea, really. We all know that aviation requires coordination, speed, mental alertness, physical fitness, and obviously tennis brings those attributes as well. And I figure it must work because Paul Riddle will be approaching his 81st birthday next month. So I gave him a tassel that has 81 on it, and he wondered, how I could be so perceptive. Actually, it's a tassel that was left over from the last graduating class because they graduated in 1981. But he's been with us now for 10 or 12 days, and he's run us all into the ground. We asked him to come a little bit early so he could spend some time with the students and the faculty and the staff and some of the people in the community, and he's done that. He's been to banquets, parties, the Grand Canyon twice, Sedona 3 times. In spite of that kind of a schedule, I really honestly believe he's spent more time with the students in the last week than the majority of us on the staff or people in the faculty would have spent. So if tennis is deserves any credit for that stamina that he has, then I'm ready to start building the courts and taking up the game myself. Paul Riddle genuinely loves young people. You can see that when you watch him and when you're with him. And the way that he would sit in the snack bar last week and just bring up conversations with students as they came through. Whether he's in a group of 1 or 2 or in a large group like he was in the auditorium, the relationship just shines. And it's been extremely important to us to be able to dip back into our heritage, Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and find not just stories, not just history, but the reality, the flesh, and the power of John Paul Riddle. Well, I can go on all day, obviously, as he can also, I might point out. I picked him up at the airport, and 3 hours later, I dropped him at the residence where he was going to stay. And I had been listening to a chronology of aviation as it grew. And I thought just once, afraid to show my ignorance, I would inject the idea that, well, that happened in 1929, didn't it? Well, we were about 15 minutes from the residence when I finally got up the courage to make that kind of an input. He'd been talking for 2 hours and 45 minutes about the growth of aviation, and I said, 1929, wasn't it, Paul? He said, hell no, we're not even up to 1919 yet. He says that he's never worked a day in his life, that he has enjoyed so much the things that he has done, whether it had to do with aviation, whether it was involved in tennis, whether it was more of his modern life. He has never really worked. He felt that he's been on a vacation all of that time. But to us who know him, we know that it wasn't a vacation from the standpoint of history. He's been a true pioneer and a leader in the aviation world. But even more importantly, I feel, he's a real gentleman, has become a good friend, and I think has made the world a lot better than it was when he entered it. And he's still working that. Paul, I'd like to introduce you now, but we looked into your history. We looked into his background, and we found one noticeable, glaring error in what he had accomplished. It seemed almost embarrassing to us that the university that he helped found had not yet presented him with a degree. And I would like him to come forward now, and I'd like to ask Ray Sigafus to come forward to give me a hand in rectifying what I consider to be a glaring error.
This is what you get for talking too much.
Paul, it is with a great deal of pleasure that on behalf of the authority vested in me by the Board of Trustees of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, that I confer upon you today the degree of Doctor of Aeronautical Science, honoris causa, with all of the rights, privileges, and responsibilities pertinent thereto. Thank you. Congratulations.
Well, that makes my job real easy because the whole reason for saying all of that was to finally introduce to you Dr. John Paul Riddle.
Well, I don't know who to trust anymore. I couldn't be more surprised. I couldn't be happier. I couldn't be more appreciative. I thought I'd seen some happy days in my life when I first heard about flying, when I got to meet the Wright brothers, when I saw my first airplane, when I had my first airplane ride. I forgot the trains I saw and things of that type, but we've lived in a wonderful age. And then to see television, a man go on the moon and back, impossible. It couldn't happen, but it did. See? I came here to speak for 2 or 3 hours, and I worked on a speech and worked on it, and it got longer and longer and longer. And just as I came over here, he says 10 minutes is the limit, so I threw the speech away. But when you love something and know something, you don't realize you're talking about it. I never dreamed of doing anything but aviation. And to see these young men here and young ladies, and to know what they have in front of them, I'm a little bit envious. I'd like to do it over again myself. When he said that I'd never worked, I don't think I have. When you enjoy something, you don't want to leave it. Many times I was at 3 o'clock in the morning out at the airport, helping get the planes ready, and that was a joy, a pleasure. In the early days, we didn't fly after 10 o'clock because it was too rough. See, we did all our flying before 9. Certainly in the early days, there was no parachute, nothing like that. Even the test pilots until about 1921 or 2 didn't use parachutes. Jimmy Doolittle was flying an MB-3. That's a Thomas Morris airplane that you could reach out and almost touch the ends of the wings. Had a 300 horsepower Hispano Suiza in it. And Jimmy was one of our best test pilots. He was the head of the test section at McCook Field, which was in the head of the Air Force. And in that test flight, the trailing edge folded up. By some miracle, he got the plane down safely. See? Then he started yelling for parachutes. He had no parachute then. We lost an awful lot of good boys on account of it. But if you got to remember that the Wright brothers, who taught them? They taught themselves. And of the first 50 or 60, well, more than that, I'm sure, people that flew taught themselves. The Wright brothers put in a little school, but people didn't go to it. Consequently, 3/4 of them, and more than that, suppose, were killed. And that subject, I just want to touch on this a minute because I would say that 3/4 of the accident in aviation up to date have been unnecessary. They've been pilot error, caused by bravado, caused by wanting to, I don't know. Alcohol had a lot to do with it. I've known fellas that flew when they were so tight they couldn't walk. But then in those days, the pilot was beyond reproach. You didn't reproach him. Finally, we did. But in Embry-Riddle, a certain instructor of mine in advanced training, he was the first general killed in Australia by a Zero. And he taught me to strive for perfection. Be contented but never satisfied. See? Also that there was that genius was just an infinite capacity for hard work. See? And the harder you work, the more sure you're going to be for success. Now, I don't want you to be scared about flying, but this world is in kind of an unstable condition and always has. We didn't realize it until we see this Cosmos series and other things. There may be thousands of other worlds just so big that we don't know about. But this is a very special place. You all are very special people. Nobody should be as interested in you as you are. See? Nobody should be as interested in your neighbors as you are. See? And that goes not for the people in this country, for all over the world. Aviation has increased our communications so terrifically, now with television, that we've almost come to the point where we have to have one world. There's no possibility of these little squabbles, but because if some little dictator jumps up and has the bomb, what can he do? He can practically annihilate the world. See? So we got a lot of stuff thinking to do. And you boys are going to be doing it. You girls are going to be doing it. And what you do, you're going to set an example. The only reason that Embry-Riddle grew at all was because the first people that we taught were good. They got out, and by their reputation, people came in. I imagine most, I don't know, but I imagine most of you came here through somebody that said Riddle was a place, or Embry-Riddle was a place or something. I meet people on the street now, oh, I knew your father in Cincinnati. Certainly. How was he? Well, Mr. Embry-Riddle was a very fine man. See? Well, I used to, my kids would be with me. That's one of my sons there, and his daughter-in-law, granddaughter. What? When they put this around me, well, it's pretty hard to think, because now I'm supposed to be learning. Before I get back on this little serious note, I just want to say that I didn't realize what a good place and a good school Prescott was. But you've got a meteorological department here that's unbelievable. In one day, they gave me 4 seasons. And they used Mr. Dailey to do it. We left here. We had a little rain on the way. We went up to the Grand Canyon, snowing. You couldn't see a prettier Christmas card in the middle of Maine in winter. The snow was down. It was absolutely beautiful. I enjoyed it because a few days before, he sent me up with David Callahan. And we flew over the canyon, down into the canyon. I've been over it maybe 100, 200 times at altitude, but never down low like that. Boy, it made me wish maybe I... There he is back there. It made me wish that maybe I should have studied geology. See, now I wish I'd not only studied aviation more, I wish I'd have studied geology, logic, and psychology, and I wish I'd saved a little more money. I just want to say this, that you've got to play it safe, because once you're gone, you're gone. That's it. It doesn't bother you anymore, but it bothers all your friends and families. So don't be panty-waist or chicken or anything like that. Do what's right, what you think is right. People may not love you, but they'll respect you. If you try to be all things to all people, nobody's going to respect you. Nobody's going to hardly love you. You're not going to love yourself. Well, I could talk on for hours, but I just want to say how much I've enjoyed this. I couldn't believe the hospitality that Prescott and the students have afforded me. I couldn't believe the beautiful scenery when you get around Sedonia. My granddaughter goes to school at Sedonia. I just couldn't believe she looks out at the cathedral. People that, who was it, Keats, that said the thing of beauty is a joy forever? He was right. I wish you all Godspeed, and God bless all of you. Thank you.
Each of the senior classes elects their own representative, someone to present their feelings on this day. And it's my honor to introduce the senior class speaker, Chris Walton.
Good morning, Provost Dailey, Mr. Riddle, distinguished faculty, administration, fellow graduates, families, and friends. It's a great honor for me to be here this morning talking to you. Let's reflect back to 1978 when Embry-Riddle first opened its doors. For many of us, it was the first time we would be away from home. It would also be a new experience. It would also be a new experience for Embry-Riddle. This would be the first time that they would open a campus in the West. Remember driving in through the front entrance and seeing a big open field, the green ghettos, and three houses? Then your mom says, "Where's the campus? That can't be it." Then your dad says, "Are you sure you want to go to school here? You still have time to sign up at home." Well, we were sure. We stayed and we endured. Most of us are pioneers from back then, and staying was one of the most important decisions we made in our lifetimes. Since then, we have grown and matured, just as this university has grown and matured into the finest aviation-oriented university in the world. There has been quite a change since the beginning. We now have new roads, the best dormitories I have ever seen, new classrooms, wind tunnels, almost 1,000 students, and the list goes on. Most of this came in just 3 years, and there is more coming. Soon there will be a new pub, racquetball courts, soccer, rugby fields, tennis courts, and much more, all in planning for the future. With all this growth and change, though, you'd think that the classes would become huge and the faculty almost non-existent when you wanted to talk or needed help. This is not the case. The faculty have made themselves available to talk to at any time. They have been a wealth of information and help, concern, and dedication that we couldn't possibly attain at a large university. These people have had a never-ending source of energy and enthusiasm for the subjects that they teach. This energy and enthusiasm has been contagious and has been the prime motivator in our studies and in everything we do. Don't be fooled when you see us sitting out behind the dorms in the sun. Every one of us had a book in our hands getting ready for finals. I remember going to physics at 8 o'clock in the morning a couple years back. I couldn't believe how much energy Dr. McGee had for the subject he taught. I really hated physics until then. He made it so interesting and so easy to understand. Wait. Then I took the first test. After that, I thought, I don't really know this. What happened? But we all made it past that challenge, and we're ready for more. Thank you, Dr. McGee, for changing our views of physics. It really isn't that bad. It's just the test. One thing I was never caught saying was there's nothing to do here. There was always something to do. We did come here for an education, but a very important part of that education are the social activities and friends. These are vital parts of campus life. In fact, many of us were involved with helping organize, run, or participate in many of the clubs and teams on campus. Graduates here today have been a part of our student government, have run our school newspaper, have helped organize our first school yearbook. Some of you have participated in soccer and rugby teams, spreading the name of Embry-Riddle throughout Arizona. Some of you have participated in a school championship softball team in town. Several of you have helped organize and participate in clubs like Alpha Eta Rho and NIFA. In the process of doing all this, we have made friends. Where would we be without friends? These fellow students that we call our friends have always been there when we've needed help, someone to talk to share problems and successes. Together, friends experience the sad moments and happy moments. Friends have helped make college life a very memorable and exciting experience. We will continue to meet people and make friends throughout our careers, but hopefully we will not forget the friends we have made here at Embry-Riddle. Now, what about the people who have made this experience possible? They are the people who never did anything or knew anything in high school, but suddenly became smarter when we were in college. They were the people who we always turned to for advice and understanding when we needed help. They were the ones who gave us constant support, love, guidance, and inspiration that got us started, kept us going, and helped us finish. And besides all that, they paid some bills. Do you know who I'm talking about? It's you, Mom and Dad. I know that at times you wonder if all that you have done is appreciated. And I know that at times it has been hard for us to show our appreciation and love for all you have accomplished. But we do thank you very much for all your love and support, and remember that your efforts to make us what we are today will never be forgotten. Well, here we are today at the end of our formal education, but it will not stop here. We will continue to learn and grow, moving to bigger and better challenges, enjoying life by taking in all that we can and giving all we can in return. A chapter ends, and you must think of happy times you've known, the opportunities you've had, the ways in which you've grown. A chapter begins, and you must think of all you plan to do. Here's hoping that you reach each goal and see each dream come true. Fellow graduates, good luck in whatever you do and wherever you go. Stay in touch. On behalf of all my fellow graduates, I would like to thank Mom and Dad, the faculty and administration, and most of all, Mr. Riddle. Thank you.
Robert J. Serling. You were born in Cortland, New York in 1918. You are a world-renowned author and chronicler of air progress. Your career began as a newspaper reporter in Ohio after graduation from Antioch College in 1942. You served as an instructor in aircraft identification during World War II, and after leaving the Army, you became manager of the United Press International's Radio News Bureau in Washington, D.C. You began covering civil aviation news in 1947, and in addition to being the radio news chief, you were named in 1960 the United Press International's aviation editor. You held this post for 6 years until you left to devote your full efforts toward the authorship of aviation books, both fiction and nonfiction. And over an 8-year span, you won the TWA Best Aviation News Reporting Award 7 times. Robert Serling, you have written over a dozen books, with 2 more to be published in 1982. Among your most famous is the bestseller, The President's Plane is Missing. Included in the many citations you have received are awards from the Airline Pilots Association, the Flight Safety Foundation, the University of Southern California School of Aviation Safety, and the Sherman Fairchild Foundation. In collaboration with your brother, Rod Serling, you served as technical advisor on many television films dealing with the aviation field, and have authored several film documentaries, including the prize-winning Takeoff, produced by the Air Transport Association. Your meticulous research has earned you the nickname Aviation's George Plimpton. In fact, to get authentic pilot training background for the novel She'll Never Get Off the Ground, you went through the Boeing 737 Ground and Flight School at Western Airlines. And before writing the book Stewardess, you enrolled in an Eastern Airlines flight attendance class, went through training, and actually graduated as a qualified flight attendant. You, your wife, and 2 children recently have moved to Tucson, Arizona from Maryland. You have brought to our state a wealth of knowledge and the love of aviation. Robert Serling, we stand in awe of your ability, your creativity, and your many achievements for the betterment of aviation. The trustees of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, with the consent of the faculty, bestow upon you this day the university's highest and most respected award, a Doctorate of Aeronautical Science, honoris causa. Congratulations, Dr. Robert J. Serling.
University, and upon recommendation of the faculty, it is with pleasure that I confer upon you today the degree of Doctorate of Aeronautical Science, Aeronautics honoris causa, with all the rights, privileges, responsibilities appurtenant to thereto. Congratulations.
You'll notice that no matter what happens, you can't upset our timing. That's basically because we don't have any. There is only one award that we have chosen to give at the graduation ceremonies, and it goes to that student who is recommended to me as the provost by the Dean of Students and the Dean of Academics as embodying the true spirit and capabilities and achievements of the graduating class. And I don't even know who that is until I reach down here now and pull out this plaque. This graduation, the Provost Award, presented on the occasion of her graduation, goes to Terrell Thomas.
Thank you to my parents for putting me through. It's been a long haul, but we made it. Thanks.
Well, we're coming to the close of the ceremony, and I think it's appropriate that we recognize a few groups. First of all, I'd like to ask the graduates once more to stand so that we can recognize them for their 4 years of achievement. Thank you. And for the parents, spouses, and families of the graduates, I'd like you all to stand if you would. Not so fast. Then another group of people that Mark so aptly pointed out, a part of that group that doesn't get recognized very often. I'd like to see the staff members of the university, those people who aren't in the classrooms teaching, stand for a minute so that we could recognize their contributions. We're one big family here, and we need that as much as anyone else. And finally, the gut issue, where the rubber meets the road, where the student meets the education, the faculty, if they would stand. Thank you. Chuk is not here, so we'll skip that one. The last thing I would like to point out is that there is reception in honor of the graduates and their families. We ordinarily hold it in the cafeteria, but due to our renovation process there, we're going to hold it in Building 30. That's, if you leave the auditorium on this side, you can walk down the path that heads down towards the main part of the campus. It's the first building on the left-hand side. And the women's organization of the campus have put this reception together. They do at each ceremony, and it's an opportunity for us all to get together, give you a chance to meet the best speaker we've ever had at these events. Thank you all very much for coming. I hope to see you all down at the reception. Dave?
I'd like you to bow your heads for just one moment. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time of celebration. Help each of us to realize that the awarding of these degrees has not only prepared each of us graduates, or each of these graduates, to secure a highly technical and prestigious position, but also places them in a role of responsibility in this country to provide leadership for safeguarding our country's heritage and its future. Grant each of us, Lord, young and old alike, the strength, the courage, and the wisdom to stand for and to do those things that we know are right, true, and just, that our families and country will be strengthened. Also grant each of us a safe journey back home, wherever it may be, and a warm, love-filled time in celebrating the birth of your Son. For it's in Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.